Move the bag. Tell me your name.
Make a pact with the Geek Legion of Doom.
Brendan Rudnicki writes and directs Evil Follows. This is a 2026 low-budget possession movie. The movie follows a young couple as they have bought their first house. Unknowingly, it was the scene of a possession exorcism gone wrong, where 3 people died. Almost immediately, weird things start to happen, and the husband finds what's called a dybbuk box in the garden, and this is a kind of a box used to trap the demon, which he inevitably lets out by accident. And then it starts to really get messed up as this demon aggressively targets the couple, particularly the wife, who's feeling down because her mother has passed away. Inevitably, possession is inevitable, and the only hope seems to be this sort of occult expert who offers his help. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? Now, this is a lower budget movie, and I have actually reviewed some of Rudnicki's previous films. And this one, I've got to say, from what I remember from his previous films, seems a little bit more professional. It seems a little bit more polished. Even though it is low budget and still looks like a low budget movie, it just feels kind of more confident. And I guess that makes sense. Obviously, when you're a filmmaker, you're basically going through learning new things and kind of what works and what doesn't. So it makes sense that, in someone's filmmaking career, there's a progression in talent, and I think that's on display here, because I do think it's again, in the context of a low budget movie, I think it's a reasonably well done kind of possession film. It's nothing original, but I gotta say there's some decent scares. There's some pretty good jump scares here. I have to say that one of them particularly actually kind of got me. It does borrow a few things here and there from kind of other properties, but nonetheless, it's done fairly well when you can kind of consider the budget. I think the acting, is pretty solid. I mean, nothing kind of Oscar-worthy or outstanding necessarily, but certainly solid for the budget of this movie that it is. And then one area where I particularly like, we actually see 2 possessions in this movie. We see the beginning, the possession, and this is the one that kind of went wrong, and then it's very much like a kind of typical possession like you've kind of seen before. And then the possession later on is a little different, because even though it's the same demon, it is much more kind of less hissing and kind of like bestial, and is able to have a very much a kind of conversation, and is quite sort of frank and able to kind of have a back and forth, and is not sort of hissing and making kind of monster sounds and stuff. And I quite like the fact that it's almost like very much a regular conversation to a degree. I mean, there's certainly threats and stuff in there, but it's almost like this sort of demon is like, right, enough of the kind of like the crazy kind of spooky stuff. Let's just skip down to brass tacks, and we're going to talk and things like that. So I quite liked it in a way. I also think it was interesting that the second possession, there's not a priest in attendance. It's just like a cult expert, really. It's a little unclear, I have to say, about what his background is. They call him a doctor, but who knows? But it's certainly not a priest. So it's like, what difference will that make? What can he bring to the table what a priest can't? But also, obviously, he possibly can't do things and stuff. So, there's some elements here that add a little bit of minor differences to a kind of, a somewhat otherwise relatively standard possession film, admittedly. Again, we have some kind of practical effects here. It's nothing outstanding, but I don't think it's necessarily bad. It all kind of, I think, Rudnicki wisely has kind of kept in the budget kind of and the ambition of the movie within the budget, and not try to kind of overextend himself, trying to kind of do things which are, you know, clearly that the budget prohibits. So I think the movie does a good enough job of still making a kind of a watchable film, which although arguably you can still tell it's a low budget, it's still good enough where I think you can kind of enjoy it if you don't mind a kind of you know, an independent lower budget movie and you're a fan of possession films. I think there's a lot to kind of enjoy here. Let's talk about what doesn't work. I mean, it is still, despite what I've just said, it does have a lower budget feel to it, and I think some people watch low budget movies after having watched things like, I don't know, the Pope's Exorcist or things like that, higher budget movies, and then watch something like this and you go, well, that's not the kind of the same. This looks really cheap. Yes, it does. It has a fraction of the budget, and it's you've got to realise that you're watching a lower budget movie, which I think some people don't. But it does look. It still does look like lower budget. Obviously there's limited time, you know, limited takes and things. Not a huge amount of kind of backstory and stuff like that, and you know, so there's definitely some restrictions to be had here. The effects, I think, are relatively well done for what they are, but there's nothing kind of particularly sort of that you haven't really seen before. There is one quite good scene where the possessed wife is kind of pulling what looks like strands of hair, like long hair, out of her arms and things, but ultimately there's nothing particularly sort of new or exciting that you're going to kind of see in this movie. It's very much sort of business as usual, I have to say. I would have liked a little bit more context as to this doctor, and since he isn't a priest, you know, what could he actually do that a priest can't, or vice versa, or how limited is he? I think it kind of glosses over that a little bit. I think also there's a little bit of it sort of contradicts itself once or twice. For example, this doctor says, you know, that the couple kind of think, well, let's get out of the house, let's move. And it's like, no, you don't want to do that. The demon's going to follow you around, and you might be in a car when it decides it's going to, you know, go for her, which is going to be bad. Okay. But then later on he says, we've got to get her out of the house. It's feeding off the negative energy that's in this house. Well, you just told them a few scenes ago that they shouldn't leave the house. And now you're saying this house is actually feeding a demon because it has all this kind of negative energy and stuff. So it's a little bit of kind of, you know, contradicting itself to a degree in regards to, so, you know, there could have been a little bit of a touch up on the script, I feel. And ultimately it's just more or less a one location movie, so, you know, it's not exactly visually sparkling at any point because it's just basically in a house. Look, I think this is a decent enough possession exorcism movie if you don't mind lower budget movies, and you can accept that you're not going to see, you know, a movie on the kind of on what you would normally see at the cinema at that sort of level. But I think if you are happy to watch indie movies, happy to watch lower budget movies, and you like possession films, it doesn't do anything new. But what it does do is you know, tried and tested possession movie that's pretty good for the budget that I think that it kind of certainly has, and it's certainly entertaining. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you said it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Well, that was spooky. For more of that, subscribe to the Legion.